When we talk about a prosperous market, I think some people think about how government being involved would cause more chaos, but it's the exact opposite. And my argument here is that when we talk about price spikes that cripple families overnight, we're not talking about monopolies that hold entire regions hostage when this is governments getting involved. A prosperous market is stable, it's accessible, it's fair. And most importantly, it's built on a foundation strong enough to support innovation and growth. So the resolution of government ownership of commodities is necessary to ensure a prosperous market. Is that government does not mean the state takes over every industry. It doesn't mean eliminating private enterprise. It doesn't mean central planning of all production and communism will reign across the U.S. It means is that for certain essential commodities, those that form the backbone of the economy, the government should serve as a supplier and it must serve as a stakeholder to guarantee stability, competition, and access. Throughout history, the most successful economies have recognized a simple truth that some commodities are too essential to leave entirely to profit-driven forces, such as water, energy, transportation infrastructure, critical natural resources. These aren't luxury goods. They are they are the operating system of the market itself. So when these essentials become unstable, overpriced, or monopolized, every other business suffers. In many of these sectors, we face what economists call natural monopolies. It's inefficient to build five competing water systems or 10 separate electrical grids in one city. When competition disappears, profit maximization can override public welfare. By maintaining ownership or serving as a public supplier, the government ensures that prices remain fair, supply remains stable, and infrastructure investment is guided by a long-term national interest, not just quarterly earnings. And importantly, government ownership can coexist with private competition. The government can act as a baseline supplier, a stabilizer, ensuring access and preventing exploitation, while private firms innovate, compete, and expand on top of that foundation. So this model does not weaken markets, it strengthens them by preventing scarcity, speculation, and artificial price manipulation. We've also seen that markets are vulnerable to shocks, energy crises, supply chain disruptions, speculative bubbles. When the government holds strategic reserves or maintains production capacity, it can intervene during emergencies to prevent panic-driven inflation and economic collapse. You could think about how oil prices were spiking during the Russian and Ukraine war at the beginning. Joe Biden had used the petroleum reserves, the natural reserves that we have in the U.S. to help stabilize prices, to make driving a car more affordable or to heat your home more affordably. So stability encourages investment, it encourages entrepreneurship, and it encourages growth. So finally, prosperity requires participation, and businesses cannot function without reliable power. Workers cannot thrive without affordable transportation. Communities cannot develop without water and infrastructure. So when essential commodities are universally acceptable, the private sector flourishes. So the debate is not about government versus markets. It's about designing markets that are more efficient. Government ownership as a supplier and stabilizer in essential commodities provides these secure foundations upon which enterprise can truly prosper. So in short, we should affirm that strategic government ownership is not the enemy of a prosperous market. It's what makes a prosperous market possible. And that is all I have.
So you say the government ownership of utilities like water is more efficient because duplicating lines is wasteful, right? Private competition leads to inefficiency.
No, so this is about government being involved with private competition. So I don't think government is more efficient. What I believe that they can do is help uh, reduce prices and reduce price shocks, things of that nature. So I'm not saying that the government is going to be more efficient than private markets. That's not my argument.
Okay. Would you say that in a full market economy, couldn't private firms coordinate through easements, shared infrastructure, or market contracts to avoid duplication, even without a state enforcement or state interaction within the market?
They could, but there are many instances today where that doesn't occur. So it's something that is possible. But there are a lot of examples where private companies aren't as efficient and don't do these things.
Um, so, if private actors already design? mm, you're saying that it's only I'm going to switch topics really quick. You say government ownership is essential for some commodities and can coexist with private markets to make them more efficient, or sorry, not
Yes.
more efficient, sorry, more stable.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, so in a full market economy, private actors can uh, already design efficient markets, provide services, and
No.
coexist and compete through contracts and innovation. Yeah. Um, so in a market economy, private actors can already design efficient markets, provide services, and coexist and compete through contracts and innovation, right?
I would agree with that. Yes.
So what unique role does a government entity play that voluntary firms, charities, co-ops can't without claiming monopoly force or coercive funding?
So, in certain instances, like if we talk about healthcare, some people say that it's considered a commodity. The government can use their power to negotiate drug prices, and that's a really big thing to do. Is because a charity or a smaller company can't just come into the market, such as the healthcare market, and do that. The government is large enough to do that, and it can really prove to a lot of folks that the way that we're charged for drug prices are so much higher than they need to be, hence saving people money and helping the economy grow in other ways. Because, when you think about healthcare, it's expensive for a lot of people. And I think if you're able to save money in that case, you can really spend it towards other, necessities that you need in life. So that's one example I'd give of how the government can kind of step in as a bigger entity than like a charity per se. Yeah, so I just think that a lot of um, what Griffiths is saying here is, how private entities can be more efficient and that they can coexist with government already. And, when we talk about efficiencies, what I was getting at with the prompt here is a more prosperous market. And I think that, in terms of the healthcare example that I gave, I think that was like one of the big ones that kind of set me off on this is that there are a lot of things that private entities do well already. But when it comes to things like natural resources and commodities like healthcare, what you see a lot of time are companies looking to make money off of essential needs for the consumer. So when we talked about electricity or water sources, you actually have a company out there that's saying, how do we provide these resources to people at their expense, not how can we provide them at as a nonprofit. And I think when you talk about these resources and commodities, I think these aren't luxuries. This isn't like giving somebody an iPhone or a brand new TV. This is something that they need to survive. And so when we talk about commodities in a way that's necessary for folks to survive, I don't really understand why it wouldn't be a good idea to have a government that isn't looking to make profit off of folks who need these essential resources like a private company would, because at the end of the day, private companies answer to stakeholders and shareholders, and they need to make money so that they can be happy and buy whatever stock that they support in the market. So a government entity doesn't need that. And I think that's why when we talk about proficient or helping the market rather than being more efficient, that's why I think government is necessary. So, anyways,
Individuals possess natural pre-political rights to life, liberty, and property, rights that exist before any state or law. The only legitimate use of force is in the negative defense of these rights against aggression. Anything beyond that is legal plunder, coercion to violate the very rights it pretends to protect. Government ownership of commodities, whether nationalizing or partial competing entities, requires precisely this plunder. It demands seizure, control, or coercive funding to acquire and hold that which belongs to individuals through voluntary production or exchange. Even if hypothetically funded voluntary donations, any entity claiming a territorial monopoly on force remains aggressive. It bars competing defense, it forces ownership through coercion, and removes resources through consensual markets. The true market economy allows only private agencies, charities, or mutual associations, no monopoly, no forced funding, and no state ownership. Practically, this is unnecessary and destructive. As Castle brought up, we can look at healthcare, a key area where affirmative often claims government negotiates better than charities. However, before the New Deal and government dominance, mutual aid societies and fraternal lodge practices provided affordable doctor care to millions of working class Americans, especially immigrants and the poor. By the 1920s, at least one-third of the adult men belonged paying small dues for doctors' visits, sick pay, hospitalization, and even orphanages. Lodges contracted directly with physicians on flat fees, keeping costs low and accountable through member oversight. These voluntary, decentralized systems delivered widespread access without taxation or central planning, far outperforming early charity alone. Government programs do not improve on this. They crowd out it through regulations, tax favored employer insurance, and welfare expansion. If voluntary mutual aid essentials effectively pre-government handled essentials effectively pre-government, why assume that states' ownership is necessary now? It isn't, it's the displacement of better voluntary alternatives. Moreover, without genuine property, private ownership and exchange, market prices for commodities vanish, leaving central allocators blind to scarcity and opportunity costs. Rational allocation becomes impossible, waste and shortages follow. Prosperity requires voluntary exchange, secure property rights, and decentralized discovery, not government coercive ownership.
All right. So I think one of the things that you brought up is that community aid or mutual aid can kind of take care of some of these problems better than government.
Mhm.
Is that right? Okay. Um,
Yeah.
would you agree though that things like water and electricity, if they were communities funded, that some people may benefit without contributing, or over time the contribution rates would decline or infrastructure deteriorate?
Can you repeat that last part of the question?
Yeah, so if water or electricity is community funded, right? You're kind of relying on people to continue to contribute rather than using tax money that's automatically, repatriated toward these things. So if some people over time contribute less, or if infrastructure deteriorates, are these things that are real concerns through like a mutual aid or community aid, you know, resource funding mechanism?
Uh, I would say not necessarily. Public utilities can often deliver lower rates, but they also suffer from deferred maintenance and deterioration. I have an example that I can post a link to, but one example could be Provo from Utah. It was a um, public broadband network, which was so poorly run it ended up being sold to Google for $1.
Okay. Um, Second question for you is kind of about price stability and crises. So if there were an energy shortage, or during an energy shortage, or like a global shock, should the government intervene to prevent an extreme price spike? Like let's say like what I mentioned during the war in Ukraine, if gas prices went up to, $8, $9 in some places like Los Angeles when they were at their extreme tops, do you think that the government should intervene at that point like we had, or we shouldn't until the market gets involved naturally?
No, government should not intervene to keep prices lower during emergency price controls, such as anti-price gouging laws, ceilings, or forced price freezes. Almost always make crises worse by creating or prolonging shortages, discouraging rapid supply increases, and misallocating scarce resources. This holds even when the goal is price stability or protecting vulnerable people. For example, when a hurricane hits, demand for essentials spikes. When supply chains break, market prices rise sharply, and this is a price signal doing its job. Higher prices ration the limited supply to those who value it most urgently, and this incentivizes suppliers to rush more goods um, because profit opportunities attract more resources quickly. Um, as I said before, on stockpiles and crises, private firms, future markets, and inventories already hedge shocks effectively. Government reserves distort prices, create a moral hazard, and delay recovery. Price spikes draw supplies in faster, controls prolong shortages and empty shelves. Um, Private utilities, Castle can say that private utilities are. Well, he's what exactly did he say? He said they are less. I feel like I should have written this down.
Probably.
Not less efficient. Yeah. I'm not fast enough to hyper clearly. Um, are less private utilities are not less efficient, but he used some other word. Voluntary coordination, easements, shared infrastructure, etc., can avoid that without any form of coercion and are often better funded and better work better. Systems offer deferred maintenance due to underpricing and political interference. Private utilities face real incentives to invest and stay profitable and avoid penalties. And there's evidence is mixed at best. Many municipal systems suffer high leakage and chronic underfunding.
Will you please define for me what you mean commodities in this context?
Yeah, so commodity to me in this context would be things like water, electricity, things that are essentials for humans, essentially to create things and use for so transportation, things of that nature to create products. At a baseline level, things in the ground is usually what people think of as commodities. But I did mention healthcare because some people do view that as a commodity in terms of healthcare, providing healthcare. So some people might not view that as a commodity similar to oil or natural gas, but I think that's been used as a definition to define it enough where I put that in there. But essentially is natural resources that folks use to use or build for other things. That's how I would like kind of loosely define it.
Define commodities for the class.
In the context of this debate, commodities refer to raw materials, basic goods, intermediate inputs that are used in production, traded in bulk, and serve as foundational elements in economic activity. These are typically standardized, fungible items with relatively low differentiation, often subject to price discovery through markets rather than branding or customization.
Even if it's against the concept of natural rights, do you think that there's any part of the market that has been improved because of government interference?
I would say no. This is another one of this is me pulling Alonzo again. If we set aside the framework of natural rights, um, there are cases to measurable improvements in certain outcomes, but I would argue that those do not consider the unseen effects. Whereas, so let's go back to public health, for example, or to healthcare, for example. Government mandates and investments dramatically reduced infectious diseases in the U.S. Chloria and typhoid death plummeted after Chicago and New York City's built water and sewage infrastructure. However, these displaced voluntary mutual aid societies and private sanitation firms over time, public systems can suffer deterioration due to underfunding and politics, for example, the water crisis. My alternative would be private utilities and communities contract with each other which could have a scaled similarity with secure property rights being more moral.
Do you have any empirical evidence that you can present of government making the market overall more prosperous? So that would be statistics, examples, or any type of documented evidence.
Yeah, so the government making the market more prosperous, I mean, we could talk about how the government subsidizes certain industries today. We can talk about, again, with healthcare, how the government has been involved and how it has reduce the amount of healthcare costs over time. Like one of the things that's actually really interesting about Obamacare is that a lot of people think that healthcare costs are going up because of Obamacare is one of the, arguments you hear about there on the right. But before Obamacare was actually implemented, the rate of costs for healthcare were going up even higher. So that's one way I would cite government intervention helping, albeit not as efficiently as I would like, or the best it can do, in my opinion. But I think that's one instance there. And then also with an industry like the car industry, for example. So without government subsidies, a company like Tesla would never have existed and created a giant market for the EV space. They use subsidies to basically come out of a really crowded automobile industry, gas industry, and find their footing because of government subsidies that were provided to them. And it now has exploded into one of the most valuable car companies in the stock market today. I think it has like the highest stock price, actually. So I think those are kind of two examples I would point to.
You say that these commodities should be essential natural resources, but that would be pulling back from what the U.S. government does now. Like, for example, the U.S. government manages like a surplus of cheese, like 1.5 billion pounds of cheese that's worth $3.4 billion for the purposes of stabilizing the market. Would you say that the U.S. government should pull back on stabilizing these other markets in favor of natural resources, or what should be done there?
I haven't thought about our cheese surplus that much, but in that case, I wouldn't be opposed to it. Chief, I wouldn't be, because I don't think that's necessary. I guess I don't view that as like a necessary good that people are relying on like they would water or electricity. So I really don't have an opinion which way. Like honestly, I would be fine with it if they regress that amount of stock ownership of government cheese. And that is a real thing. I have heard about that. So yeah, when I think about commodities and resources, I think about things that are actually like necessities for everyday life. I think that food is actually necessity for everyday life. I think a certain type by that much isn't necessary for people to survive on. So that's how I would kind of distinguish my argument, is that people need clean air and clean water to live every day, and then also things like healthcare to also be taken care of. So I wouldn't view that in this instance like government cheese as like a necessary right for them to own. So I wouldn't disagree with your point.
If you disagree that government ownership of commodities is necessary to just ensure a prosperous market, would you say that any level of government subsidization is necessary for ensuring a prosperous market in like any sector?
So I would, of course, say that no, setting aside once again deontological stuff and going to consequentialism, they distort market discovery. Subsidies artificially lower costs or boost demand in the targeted sectors they appear in. They suppress actual profit and loss signals, and entrepreneurs chase these subsidies instead of consumers' needs, and which leads to malinvestment. For example, since the 1930s, the U.S. agriculture subsidies have kept food prices artificially high, especially during the Depression, which hurt consumers while protecting farmers, which was a net negative for prosperity.
All right. So we've heard a lot about markets and about efficiency, competition, and innovation. So again, we support the market and we support competition and private enterprise, but they don't exist in a vacuum. They're built on foundations, again, energy, water, transportation infrastructure, critical natural resources. these essential commodities that every business, every worker, and every community depends on. When those foundations are unstable, the entire market becomes unstable. One of the arguments that my opponent made was that if there are supply shocks or crises, is that government shouldn't get involved to help relieve this. And if we have that option, I feel like it's a dereliction of duty not to use that to help people. And so, if the suggestion is that the private sector or voluntary systems alone can guarantee prosperity, we already know that the size and scale of a lot of those private institutions, such as a charity or mutual aid, is just not big enough to make a dent in the competition with these private sector companies. And we know that the private sector is looking out for nobody but their stakeholders and shareholders. Many of them are natural monopolies as well. We see this with the cable industry and other insurance industries. So many are finite natural resources. Many require massive coordinated long-term investments that cannot depend on fluctuating voluntary participation or short-term profit incentives. So prosperous markets require three things: stability, accessibility, and trust. Government ownership, as we clarified, doesn't mean total control of these industries. It's just serving as a supplier and stabilizer in essential commodities. And it means ensuring that foundational resources are secure, fairly priced, and managed with long-term national interest in mind. So the question before us is is not whether markets are good. The question is what makes them prosperous. And I think that, a market built purely on private control of essential finite resources risks volatility, exclusion, and instability. So government ownership of key commodities is not the enemy of prosperity. It's a safeguard. And so for those reasons, I affirm the resolution.
Castle has argued that government ownership of essential commodities is necessary to create a stable, accessible, and innovative market limited to utilities, energy stockpiles, and possibly healthcare negotiation. This claim is both morally and historically false. Morally, individuals possess, of course, natural free political rights, and government ownership, and furthermore, government ownership, whether full or monopoly, partially competing entities, requires coercion. And practically, history proves that voluntary systems deliver essentials without government. Before the New Deal, the modern welfare state, mutual aid societies and fraternal lodges provided affordable healthcare and emergency support to millions of working class Americans, especially immigrants, the poor, and minority communities. By the 1920s, at least 1/3 of adult men belonged to these societies. Tens of millions of men, including families, paying small dues for doctors' visits, sick pay, hospitalization, disabilities, benefits, orphanages, and widows' pensions. Lodges directly contributed with physicians on flat fees, keeping costs low. And in emergencies like hurricane aftermaths, fraternal orders mobilized rapidly, providing food, medical aid, shelter, burial support, and rebuilding funds. After disasters like the 1900 Galveston hurricane, lodges stepped in with relief and long-term care for more accountability and quickly then centralized government systems. Modern mutual aid groups after Ida, Ian, Helene, and Milton have done much the same thing, just on a smaller scale, because they have been regulated almost out of existence, which proves decentralized, community-driven response outperforms top-down intervention. And these societies were not marginal. They were the primary safety net for the working class. They were regulated out of existence through AMA restrictions on contract medicine, insurance regulations favoring commercial firms, tax-favored employer plans, and welfare state crowding out, not because they failed, but because the government displaced them. The government is not necessary for stability, accessibility, or crisis response. Voluntary mutual aid and market coordination achieve these better without coercion. I yield the rest of my time.